Do men and women negotiate in the same way? Is there a difference in getting what you want depending on your gender? I'm going to unpack this a bit with my own experience and looking at the research that backs that up. So stay right where you are. Negotiations don't just happen in the boardroom. They happen in everyday life. I'm Susie Tomanchuk, expert negotiator, author, and TEDx speaker. I'm glad you're here. I'm going to show you the art of negotiation without manipulation so you can level up, know your worth, and adopt a negotiator mindset. Let's go. Hi and welcome. I'm Susie. I'm so glad you made the choice to be here today. I have to admit, this is a topic that I haven't put on the top of my list to talk about because it can feel really controversial to talk about gender stereotypes, especially because some of the research that started this conversation probably was pulled in the 80s. And a lot of it talks about how women are more socialized to just do what's right for the business, what's right for the company. And men are more likely to ask for more, ask for compensation for what they do. They looked at the way that girls and boys are socialized as they grow up. And they showed that, a girl is more likely to set the table and to be asked to do things that is good for the family. And so that the girl just would do those things, where a boy is asked to do his normal chores and might be asked to mow the lawn or wash the car, as the research uses as an example. And what they found was that the dad would give the son $5 for doing it or just give him some additional compensation. So that's kind of where the research started, is that socially, men and women, girls and boys were socialized to kind of look at the world from a different lens. And while that makes sense, when you think about that research, it sounds very outdated because we don't have regular set dinner times, and setting the table seems like something that's very outdated. But in the research that they've done, even recently, there still is that trend. There still is this bias about how maybe women see themselves and how other people see them. And I've certainly seen it in my experiences. I can tell when I need to kind of turn it up or turn it down when I'm asking for something. I react very sensitively to the person on the other side of the table, and I'm much more in tune to the emotions that they're showing, where I've seen my counterparts or somebody that's on my side that is male in the same conversation, kind of just moving through that and not spending a lot of time dwelling in it. Like, you can see that I'm more apprehensive and he will just move right through it and kind of avoid those nonverbals or those verbals, meaning like the tension in the voice or the apprehension that comes with some word choice. So it's interesting to look at. I certainly have seen it for myself, and I know I need to focus on it. I think about the person that's in front of me and how I need to show up. I also think that we don't necessarily always remember that we hear our voice through our filter and other people hear our voice through their filter. So showing up a little bit differently than feels exactly authentic to us might be a good strategy. I looked at a couple pieces of research. Harvard talks about, in some of the research that they did on a report that they published, that women tend to focus on more collaborative approaches in high stakes situations, intense conversation, and difficult conversations. They look at, what's in it for me and you, where men tend to look at it more transactional. They don't look at it as the long-term relationship. They just go and focus on what they want. It's interesting to think about. For me, that's all around mindset. And that reemphasizes what I said, or puts kind of an underlining to what I said about the difference between me and my counterpart when I've been sitting side by side with a male, and how we just had a different feeling. In fact, it would also make me feel a little uncomfortable because I feel like he was being more of a bulldozer moving through, where I had a little bit more finesse, but then it worked. Even though I felt uncomfortable, it actually worked. So it's interesting to be an observer of that and think about, what is your mindset? Like Harvard said, are you more of a collaborator? How are you looking at the situation? Carnegie Mellon is where some of that initial research came from that I was alluding to. And they said that women are less likely to initiate negotiations. And I see that in the wild a lot as well. I have a lot of people who tell me, I have a little Susie like me on their shoulder. And so it gave them the courage to move forward. And to me, when I hear people say that, in a way, I'm honored that I can be the light that gives them the courage to continue to move through. But at the same time, it's like, oh, I want people to find that for themselves. But to me, that means I didn't feel like I should move into it, but I knew I should do it. So women tend to want to give themselves a reason why. And it could be the relationship that makes them apprehensive. Maybe they don't like to surprise somebody, or they don't want to sound too needy. I certainly get in my own way sometimes and allow my own voice in my head to say, why you? Why now? Why are you asking for so much? They're going to think that you're selfish. They're going to judge you. And even one of the stories that I've told about when my peer in my corporate role was given the office at the end of the corner, and I said, I want the office in the corner just out of principle. I remember thinking they were going to fire me. They're going to think I'm not grateful. So we can definitely get it in our own way as well. So it's something to consider. I will have some answers for you from my perspective for sure, but I want you to consider, is your gender getting in your way? Does some of the stories I tell you today make you think about, maybe I should change my approach? Maybe I'll just try for fun to see if I do. And then also checking yourself and how you might be getting it in your own way, and those voices that tell you to move forward or tell you to slow down. So stick with me. I'll tell you some relatable contextual stories and get you to start thinking about what you should consider stop doing. We'll be right back. When I think about gender, I will say that I've talked to hundreds of people who negotiate either for a living or just about the concept of negotiation. And I have found a lot of men that when I talk to about the research, that they tend to put themselves in that stereotype of women. And I will also say that people just generally are more comfortable in different situations. And so what I find, and the research also says this too, that women are really great at negotiating for others or their team because it doesn't feel so self-focused. And so that makes sense because we all, we kind of know that we don't want to feel selfish or look selfish or feel like we're looking at only our own interests in mind. We're keeping our own interests in mind. And the other thing that the research shows is that men are better at negotiating in ambiguity. It's a tough word to say. And when women know, like, this position is, the range is X, they're more likely to go for it, to ask for it, because it's out there. Somebody else is making it. The perception is there that it's kind of like it has a sticker on it that says what the price is, where men are more likely to just put a number out there and not feel anguish about it. And I actually had a client the other day that was going to be promoted to a new position, and he asked for an increase of 1/3 of his salary. It was quite something. And he got a yes. He knew the leverage that he had, and he didn't know if that was possible, but it certainly worked for him. So that really reiterates it for me, although a very small sample size. But when I think about those perceptions, I like to think about, how do I get clarity? If that's true, that it's easier to negotiate when you have clarity, that's one key. And also reframing it, that it isn't, the compensation you make isn't just supporting you. It could be supporting your children. It could be supporting your future. Really reframing it for yourself, no matter the gender you are. We certainly get in our own way, and it's an important consideration to think about where you come at this. And one of my clients was going up for more. Well, she was going to ask for more money. It was not during a regular increase. She was going to approach her boss. It was the right time. She had just delivered a big project. It was the right time to do it. And she had decided exactly how much she was going to ask for, when she was going to do it. She had the set meeting. She just planned on talking about it with her boss in their one-on-one. And right before she went in, she got, cold feet. She had heard that the boss was complaining about budgets and that felt a little bit skittish about the fact that there were some projects that they still needed to support to get through to the finish line. And she wasn't sure that she had the budget to do that. So my client was like, oh my gosh, the budgets are really tight right now. This is not the right time. So she put it off and she didn't ask. And then she decided 3 months later, same thing. There was something else that came up. And so time and time again, another 6 months went by and she hadn't asked. And when time, you are replacing that with money. When you don't ask, you're putting off the future self. And so considering that, the things that might get in your way, what would have happened if she would have asked? Then the boss would have said, the budget's not good now. Why don't you come back in 3 months? Even that puts that person in the position to ask again. So there wouldn't have been a reason why she shouldn't have at least asked. So that's one thing I want you to stop doing, is to stop getting in your own way. When you make a decision to move forward with something, make sure that you're careful, that you don't convince yourself that there's another factor that you didn't consider. And it's not like in your mind, you can just see that voice. And it's like this really scary voice that's trying to manipulate you. It's these really nice thoughts of, don't bug them right now. So be conscious of those things that come up for you. Another thing that I've seen in people is once they get in front of somebody at any kind of resistance, they move back and they just kind of say, never mind. And that's another thing I want you to consider stopping, is when somebody gives you a no, and it's not always, it'd be easier, I say, if they would just say no, but they often will say it's not the right time, or it's not a decision I can make at this point. That's a soft no. And so what you want to do in those moments is not retreat, stop retreating. What you want to do is move through curiosity. Help me understand more. When would be a good time? How much is enough to ask for? What is an appropriate amount? What can the budget sustain now? And then when can we come back? So asking and moving through, don't allow no to be something that you don't even want to hear, so you don't go through. And then no being something that any kind of pushback feels like something you want to retreat. It is really interesting to be an observer of ourselves and see when we might get in our own way. Sometimes it's just, you just feel like, oh, I don't want to look like quote unquote that person by asking for something different than what is advertised. So when you think about what you need to stop, I want to really challenge you to consider what happens in your mind when you make a decision. What quickly comes to your mind after you say, I want to ask for more development. I want to ask to be promoted. I want to ask for this experience to attend the board meeting, whatever it might be for you. When you think that, be careful about what are the next thoughts that come through your mind. But why me? This person has more experience than me, that they should have this opportunity before me. So just have some awareness around what comes up for you and stop allowing that to be the factor that makes the decision for you. Make action the decision and force the other person to give you a response instead of not allowing yourself to move forward. I would say from a gender perspective, that's probably something that is pretty safe to say. I'm sure there's a lot of men listening as well that might say, hey, that's me as well. And that's fair. It's just something to consider, that we might have more empathy. We might be able to really tune into the surroundings around us, the comments that were made. And I want you to really stop letting those signals that you might be in tune with stop you from moving forward. additional thing I want to talk about is understanding the other side and the perceptions that you might bring into the conversation. How you show up in front of them is really important. And sometimes, women get a negative rap because they look too pushy or there is a perception they're asking for too much. As I had mentioned, we get in our own way to worry about that. And so that's definitely a factor of putting too much into it. But there is a lot of power in considering what is the way that you need to approach the person. Think about how do they want you to frame the ask. Make sure that you consider what factors will be important to them and even putting it in your frame. Like it's really hard for me to come to you with this ask because I know you're really busy. I know you have a lot going on and I know budgets are tight. But as you've always told me to advocate for myself, I wanted to bring this to you at this time because it's the right time to go to your boss and advocate for me. Really think about how do you do it in a way that is a voice that they can listen to, that they don't have a bias against you. So being really thoughtful about the approach is really important and paying attention to the reaction. So I didn't want to leave that out because it is important to consider how somebody perceives you, but not allow it to get in your way. So that leaves me to one of the tips that I want you to consider starting. And it's really around reframing this negotiation for you, this difficult conversation. We avoid a lot our difficult conversations that we need to have. And what happens with difficult conversations that we put off and we actually make them more high stakes because we allow that time to then we feel more guilty about waiting, whether it's affecting us or we're going to really surprise the other person. So really reframing it as advocacy for you. You're asking for more money because it's not just a benefit to you. It's maybe it shows the organization that they need to be proactive and consider what people in your position need. It shows that movement. It shows courage to other people. If it's for a difficult conversation, remember that idea that if you wait, it's going to make it more difficult for you to approach this person or for them to have the context of making the adjustments they need to make. The longer from the situation that person needs to understand, the harder it is for them to get that context. And when you think about it as in that way too, they kind of feel slighted. It's a harder lesson to hear for them because they're like, why'd you wait so long to tell me? So really reframing it for yourself that this is the right time. This is the right way to move forward so that you're encouraging yourself and that will eliminate the fear that you have to move forward because it kind of takes away those excuses. So reframing it for yourself in a way that gets you to move forward and to really do it. The second one is to prepare for pushback. Anticipate the worst case scenario. Maybe the worst case scenario is, are you out of your mind? Why are you even considering this? And so if you don't hear that, they go, well, I'm sorry, it's not the right time. Then you're prepared for the worst case scenario. And when you practice for that pushback, oh, I hear you. I know that you're saying that it's not the right time, but I've been waiting for 6 months. I've asked you before, whatever that positioning is to really put it back in their court or say, you know what? I just finished this big project and I really feel like this is the right time. This is worth this incentive to really keep me motivated, keeping me move forward. So preparing for the pushback so that when you hear it, you don't become paralyzed by it or you don't retreat, and then having your answer ready for whatever they might put in front of you. And if it's not somebody you might have to imagine what are all the things they could say. Ask somebody else to help you with that. It's somebody you're more than likely to be able to assume what they're going to say, and you can really prepare for that. And then build confidence along the way. I talk about adopting a negotiator mindset, and not just because it's a good thing to try. It allows you to try things out. It does increase your courage by practicing framing your ask, about being clear about where you're going, about thinking about the interests of the other party. Those are all things that you can practice so that when the stakes are high, when it feels like there's a lot at stake for you, it feels a little bit more comfortable because you've gone through the iterations, you've practiced it, you feel a little bit more comfortable with it. And even being able to say to yourself, you know what? I'm a negotiator. I'm comfortable with negotiating. Even getting yourself to say that, even if it's an affirmation to yourself and owning that can give you that courage to say, this isn't new to me. This is going to feel really hard for me to move forward. I know I'm going to have to frame it in the right way. I know I'm going to feel apprehensive along the way, but I'm going to make this commitment and I'm going to stick to it. I'm going to move forward. So think about reframing it for yourself in a way that you know that will encourage you to move forward. Prepare for pushback. Know that it's going to happen. Consider the worst thing they could possibly say so it's not surprising to you. And then practice doing this on a regular basis. Adopt a negotiator mindset. Try these things when they aren't high stakes. That way, you'll get more confident in moving forward and you'll start to see what really works for you and what really feels comfortable. So starting something, make a commitment to yourself on what you're going to do. We'll be right back. I'm going to give you a challenge before we go. The bottom line is there is differences in terms of gender in how we negotiate and even how it's perceived by the other side. It's absolutely true. So you want to be cognizant of that. You want to be true to you. You don't want it to get in your way, but you need to be aware of it and be an observer of the people around you that even in 3 months or in soon you're going to ask for more. Watch those people and see how you're going to frame it. Be an observer of what's happening around you, even as you practice some of these things to adopting a negotiator mindset. It's practicing those skills and watching how other people do it or what makes them say yes. Be an observer of that, even if it's something that somebody else asks that you observe. Watch that around you. It's an important aspect to do. And remember, we're all really different. The way we want to hear a request is based on our past experiences, some of those biases. Gender definitely looks at it differently. So check yourself. Are you somebody that just expects to work hard and things come back to you? If you're worthy and you don't tend to ask more. Just up your ask in whatever it is. Just challenge yourself to ask more. And remember, I take a lot of strength from knowing that men a lot of times look at it as transactional and they just have the courage to ask and they don't worry about what people think. I try to take that on sometimes so that I will have the courage to ask for something that I wouldn't normally do. So I think the lesson here is to just take a pulse on yourself, be an observer of what might get in your way. Remember those voices, those apprehensions aren't obvious. They're not holding a sign to say, here's the voice that's getting in your way. They can be very subtle and slow you down, and time it can be of the essence or making you really retreat quicker than you want to. So take that courage. Use Susie, the little Susie on your shoulder if you need to for the first couple times, but take courage to ask more. Think about the way the person on the other side wants to hear it. So I want to challenge you to add an ask, add 2 asks this week that you're going to do. And I'd love for you to go to negotiationlove.com. I'd love for you to join my newsletter, Adopting a Negotiator Mindset, where I talk about these concepts. I'm going to dig into this concept a little bit deeper. So don't miss out on that. Share with the closed network of people that benefit from these concepts that they can incorporate in their day to day. I'm so glad that you made the choice to be here today. If you think somebody needs to hear this, feel free to share it with somebody that you know and love. They'll appreciate that you were thinking of them and that you believe in investing in them as well.